Jeff.
We are the busiest 1031 operation in North America, working almost around the clock to keep up with the tsunami of activity. Every time I step away from my computer, it fills up with new emails. It's out of control.
That's a good business out of control, right?
Yes, if you can manage it. It's like being on a surfboard and you got to keep your balance while the wave gets bigger and bigger behind you.
And did you have to get extra people?
Been staffing up. We all went remote during the pandemic, which made it hard for training. Not impossible, but hard. So now that we've got a physical office that we're manning on a daily basis, we've been hiring since June 1, bringing on more support staff, training people up, trying to increase the amount of support that we have for our very valuable, high-performing employees so that we can do more work and we can have, consistent things happening that have to happen behind the scenes to make the magic work for all of the many 1031s that we're doing. By the way, I think by like July 15th of this year, I'd done numerically as many exchanges as I'd done all of last year. And last year was busy. So we're way ahead of where we were last year for the sheer volume of exchanges that we've conducted. It's an indication of really how hot certain segments of the real estate market are. Farms are very vibrant right now. Land values are high. There are some areas like entertainment venues and hospitality and some restaurants, some retail that are still a little soft, but there are a lot of areas, multifamily was one of them, where things are still very, very brisk. We're just doing a ton of single family rentals, duplexes, fourplexes, vacation rentals, lots and lots of volume in this economy.
Great. I see it's 4:00 on the spot here, and we have some participants on here, and so I'm going to get rolling. So welcome to Leanne Riley's Real Estate Investing Club. Hello, everybody. And I do live interviews with expert speakers and leaders in real estate investing nationally. I'm Leanne Riley. I'm a broker and a real estate coach, and I lead the Encore investment team of realtors in the Twin Cities, Minnesota. I built a multi-million-dollar portfolio of residential, multifamily, condo development, commercial, and vacation properties. And as a national coach and trainer, I help ambitious people build wealth as real estate investors with my proven profit formula coaching program. And today we're here for some education with the Real Estate Investing Club. And you can always check out my YouTube channel. It's called Leanne Riley Real Estate. And be sure and subscribe, because that's where these interviews live, is over there. So today's topic, 1031 tax deferred exchanges and how you can use that to build generational wealth. And my guest here is Jeff Peterson. Hi, Jeff.
Hello. How are you, Leanne?
I am really good. And Jeff is from Commercial Partners Exchange, and he's got a great title, the 1031 Tax Professor. So we're going to find out about how he helps people save money in taxes with 1031 deferred exchanges. And I'll just give you a quickie bio here. Jeff got his JD degree from the University of Minnesota Law School, and he's an adjunct tax professor at William Mitchell College of Law. So we can really ask him the questions today. He's obviously a member of the Minnesota State Bar, and his company is a qualified intermediary for 1031 exchanges of real estate. Whew. So Jeff, I'm really glad to have you as our guest. And one of the things that I always do is I share with the people, how do I know you? And I started to think about that today. And, real estate investing is about networking. And I first met Jeff back when I did my very first 1031 exchange. and it was a fourplex into an apartment building. So this puts it back into the early 90s somewhere.
Right. I was going to say somewhere in the 90s, right?
Yeah, it's been a while. And somehow, even way back then, I heard, hey, he's the guy for the 1031. And so that was an apartment building in Uptown in Minneapolis that I was going into. And of course, I eventually 1031 that. And I've done a ton more with him. And what I want to tell you is it's always seamless, even when it's complicated. And I really remember one transaction. And of course, you only talk to Jeff on the phone or his people. He doesn't come to the closing. But I remember this one because it was a contentious divorced situation with a double reverse exchange. I could barely say that, right? And I remember it was seamless. So that is pretty cool. So Jeff, give us a background about what led you to becoming an expert at 1031s.
Well, as an attorney, I really groove on making people happy and doing transactional work. I like a start and a finish. I like to get a win. I like to, succeed. Transactional work is really up my alley as far as being what I consider a humble servant of capitalism. My role in the grand scheme of things, I think, is to help organically create real estate wealth, create jobs, create prosperity, and be a humble administrator in that process. And my role is really that of kind of being a fancy escrow agent. We hold the proceeds from the sale of your relinquished property, and then we apply those proceeds towards the purchase of your new, bigger, better property. And if you think about it, owners don't tend to spend a lot of money on their properties, but buyers do tend to fix up their properties when they're in the excitement of that new acquisition. So having inventory churn and turnover in the economy is a positive thing. It's a growth and renewal process. And part of the beautiful thing about 1031 is it allows people to step up into that new, bigger, better property to enhance and increase their potential wealth creation. And it's good for the entire economy.
That is for sure. So one more thing I want to do, and this is going to help you and I, Jeff, is I have a poll here. It'll just take a second, and we're going to figure out who's here listening. So all you have to do here is check the box, you listeners, of where are you in your real estate investing? And then we'll know. Okay, I started the poll, but yep, there's voting. Good, there's some voting going on.
What is BRRRR?
Oh, that's the BRRRR strategy. Buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat.
I love it.
So we're finding out who's listening here, and panelists or attendees, I want you to know also you can use the chat box as we go through today. I'm gonna ask a lot of questions, so that will get you your answers, but you can use the chat box to ask a question, okay? And I'll keep track of those for you. So here we go. Here's the results of our poll. It looks like the winner is buy and hold people are on here. Okay, we have a couple people into syndication, some BRRRR people, some fix and flips, and people are interested in scaling a portfolio. Actually, they tied with the buy and hold. And you know what? 1031 exchange is a really important part of scaling your portfolio, because heck, who wants to pay the taxes, right?
It would be nicer to reinvest that equity without the drag of taxation. Think about how much wealth you can create over time if you don't have the drag of taxation holding you back.
Oh.
And I feel bad for people that have W-2 jobs that are paying self-employment tax or, having that drag on their income. But with real estate, you can build your wealth pretty rapidly. I've seen people start with a single family home and parlay it into a fourplex and then parlay that into a 12 unit Before you know it, they're up to, 50, 60 units in a course of a decade or so.
Yeah,
It's crazy how fast
I
you can
love
build the
that.
wealth.
It is. So, okay, we're going to start at the beginning here. So what the heck is the 1031 rule for deferred taxes?
Well, if you read 26 USC section 1031, which is the Internal Revenue Code provision, it'll say something to the effect that if you hold property for investment or for use in your trade or business, you can exchange that for other real estate that's held for investment or use in a trade or business. And the gains on your disposition are deferred. They are not recognized as they ordinarily would be when you sell real estate. So you're deferring the recognition of gain indefinitely. And unlike the qualified opportunity zone deferral, 1031 deferral is sort of indefinite, maybe perpetual. With the QOZ, you're going to pay your taxes at the end of December of 2026. You may have some of it forgiven, but the bulk of it's coming due. 1031 is the tool that most real estate investors are going to use as they progress through the different stages of their life. In the early stages, you're parlaying up into bigger, better properties. In the latter stages, you're worried about risk and mitigating how much management you have to do. You may be exchanging into less management intensive alternatives or more stable alternatives. So there's all kinds of fun ways to use 1031 depending on where you're at and the investment timeline.
And when you say more stable stuff, you're talking syndications and REITs and, because you can get out of managing that 12 unit or whatever it is into other real estate investments with your 1031.
That's right. That's right. I have a friend who bought a whole bunch of properties during the recession in neighborhoods that are a little bit more volatile. And he's worried that, if we go into a downturn, the values may dramatically decrease in those neighborhoods. So while the market is hot, he's able to sell those properties in the more volatile neighborhoods and maybe exchange into more stable geographic areas. So getting out of Detroit and getting out of places where the real estate markets fluctuate more radically. Also, some vacation areas right now are super hot, but during a recession, they may be, substantially lower. So he's looking to stabilize geographically, but other people want to stabilize into asset classes like triple net lease, maybe exchanging into a Amazon distribution center where you've got a really high quality tenant on a very long-term lease. And then you have more predictable, steady income because it's all kind of predetermined when you get into it.
That's cool. Now, so we get that it's to roll the taxes, roll, except for in my situation until you get divorced and then it doesn't work so well. But explain to us what a like kind property is, because now there's rules on how we can defer this money. So what's a like kind property?
Well, in the realm of real estate, just about any real estate in the United States of America is going to be considered like kind to another kind of real estate. So unimproved raw land, farmland, think about an Iowa farm, is considered like kind to a skyscraper in New York City. Think of the Empire State Building. They're both real estate. It's just differences in grade or quality, but the character of the two assets are still real estate. So there's a broad spectrum of potential properties that are all considered like kind, which is really fun because maybe you've made money in single family rentals and you want to try owning grocery anchored retail, or maybe you want to try buying an industrial property. You're allowed to exchange into these different types of real estate because they're all considered like kind in the United States. By the way, you can also do foreign property exchanges, but U.S. property is not like kind to foreign real estate. So it has to be U.S. for U.S., which is, the bulk of what we do.
I once heard, I used to belong to the 1031 exchanger group They're
Sure.
here. I thought I heard something about somebody tried to exchange out of their property into an airplane.
No, it wouldn't be like kind,
Okay.
unless the real estate was like, I don't know, uh, unless the airplane was like
Airport?
permanently, affixed to the ground or something. It was like like the equivalent of a house that was strapped down to the ground. But no, real estate is like kind of real estate. Chattel,
Okay.
what lawyers would call personalty, is not like kind of real estate. And by the way, in 2017, Congress changed the rules effective January 1 of 2018. We can no longer do exchanges of personal property. We used to be able to
Okay.
do real, we used to do a lot of exchanges of real estate for other, I'm sorry, airplanes for other airplanes or railroad cars for railroad cars, but
Okay.
we
It
can't
was
do that anymore.
pre-17 that I heard that.
Sure.
Okay, good. You cleared that up. Real estate for real estate. But there's more to it. And that's my next questions here. The part about, okay, vacation or second homes, can we 1031 exchange, into that?
Yeah, but you got to own that vacation property for a qualified purpose, which is investment or business purposes. So if I bought a vacation property, whether it's a ski chalet, I don't know, a townhome in Tennessee or a lake cabin on the North Shore of Minnesota, maybe in Grand Marais, I need to rent that property out. I need to use it for investment or business purposes. I think both the IRS and the state taxing authorities, like the Minnesota Department of Revenue and the California Franchise Tax Board, they are wary of what they would call personal use abuse. That's where people are doing exchanges on properties that are not really held for investment or business purposes. They're really held for personal use. So you got to be real careful that you're actually using it for a qualified purpose. So there's a safe harbor that the IRS came out with because there was a lot of litigation. There was a case called Moore v. Commissioner where they kind of made an example out of a taxpayer that did a lake cabin for lake cabin exchange. The idea with the safe harbor is that the IRS wants to test each of the 2-year periods after you acquire the property to make sure that you're actually renting it out for at least 14 days in each of those 12-month periods, and that you're not using it for personal use more than 14 days a year or more than 10% of the time that the unit is rented. So you're kind of on probation, 1031 probation for 2 12-month periods where they test each of those separately. My advice is don't be cute. Just stay somewhere else. Don't use it for personal use.
Although I was reading someone who, they found their dream vacation home, whatever, but they did purchase it with the 1031 and then followed all those rules, hired management and did rental for 2 years, went there 14 days, and then they moved into it. That meets rules.
I think that's okay. And actually, there's some interplay between the other code section that's often used for real estate, which is the section 121 principal residence exclusion, which you're probably familiar with if you've ever sold your primary residence. So you can't take a principal residence exclusion on a property that you 1031'd into until you've owned it for 5 years. So maybe, Leanne, you buy that ski chalet, you rent it out for 2 years, then you go move into it for 3 years. You've got a total of 5 years of rental, or I'm sorry, ownership. And then you could sell it as your principal residence. But in that case, you'd only get 3/5 of the $250,000 exclusion if you're single, or 500 if you're married, because 2 of the 5 years it was not held as a personal residence. And by the way, the section 121 exclusion does not exclude gains from depreciation. It only excludes the gains from appreciation, the natural increase in value. So, it's a good idea maybe to piggyback the 1031 with a principal residence exclusion, but it's not the silver bullet that people think it is.
Yeah. The 1031 all by itself is a pretty good silver bullet, really, as you're growing the portfolio.
Well, I'm going to tell you what the silver bullet is.
Oh, good.
Shall we take a deep cleansing breath before we meditate?
Okay.
And then we say the mantra, defer, 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 die.
Yeah.
Because under section 1014, the step up in basis, when your heirs inherit the property, they don't get it with mom and dad's low basis. They take the inherited property with a stepped up basis, stepped up to the fair market value at the time of the decedent's death. So if you really want to make this work, you kick the can down the line, kick it, kick it, kick it, and then you kick it yourself and pass the property on to your kids. Now, Congress could change the step up in basis. And in 2010 or 11, they did mess around with the step up temporarily. And, you know, as the political winds blow more to the left, you might see a step up in basis change, but that provision's been in the tax code for a long time. Be hard to implement, but maybe they will get rid of it.
You know, and that's what I'm talking about when I say generational wealth, because you never pay those taxes. You pass it on to your kids. They pass it, you know, right now that I see it all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's nice to be the lucky biological beneficiary, the natural, you know, winner.
Well, and hopefully you were paying attention while your parents owned that real estate so that you can take over the enterprise, because it is a bit like being Spock. You know, that the running a real estate portfolio takes a special skill.
It does. It takes acumen and passion and desire. And one of the things I see a lot is that mom and dad were penny pinchers. They watched every penny. They fixed their own toilets. They changed their own light bulbs. They managed their own portfolio. They were very good stewards of their property. And they educated their children, who went off and became doctors and lawyers and pharmacists. And they've got their own professional, you know, careers. And they don't have any interest in taking over mom and dad's portfolio of real estate. And that's where I think the syndicated real estate investments, like you were talking about, make a nice way for them to pass it on to the kids without having the corresponding management responsibilities.
Yeah.
The kids can still have the steady stream of income, still get the step up in basis, but maybe not have the heartaches that the parents lived through.
Yeah.
Once Johnny's gone off the farm, it's hard to get him back on the farm.
That's right. That's right. He's in the big city now. Okay. Now, what the heck is a reverse exchange and how does that work?
Well, Leanne, today at about 3 o'clock, I had a conference call with some brothers that own a bunch of apartment buildings here, there, and everywhere. And they want to sell 3 of their apartment buildings, maybe net out about $4 million, $4.5 million of cash. They want to parlay that cash into one big centralized property. And they don't know how they can get the stars in alignment where they can sell 1, sell 2, sell 3 properties at different times and roll that money into one replacement property. And so I suggested to them, in this marketplace right now where inventories are tight, competition is fierce, maybe they want to hold off on listing their 3 relinquished properties. Instead, focus their energies on buying the replacement property first in a reverse exchange, where the qualified intermediary forms an LLC and acts kind of like a straw man purchaser. The qualified intermediary buys the replacement property and then holds it for up to 180 days, during which time you sell off your relinquished properties and you roll those proceeds into the replacement property that was parked. Well, that's really easy to do if you've got a lot of cash in your bank account, or you've got a great relationship with your banker that will do a bridge loan, kind of finance your purchase of the replacement property through your straw man first.
Right. Knowing you're going to sell that, that's his equity. But you better have a relationship in cash.
And a small, nimble community bank is typically the best place to go for that kind of money.
So the three brothers were happy, right?
I think that they're gonna try to do it because they realize they don't want to start selling, and then find that, like musical chairs, in 45 days after the first sale, they have to identify, well, what if they don't have that beautiful replacement property in their sites? They don't want to run around like chickens with their heads cut off for 45 days in a forward exchange. They'd rather lock it down and then sell second.
Well, and those larger transactions, they take more due diligence, which is time, and that we're going to talk more about that. Identifying clock is ticking, but and yet, we're active realtors out there, and you're right. If we even breathe that there's a property for sale, zoom, it can happen really fast, and you have to plan ahead, period.
I agree. And if you want to be the winning bidder on a property that everybody wants to buy, like that beautiful uptown, 1920s brick building, if somebody wants that, there's probably 10 other people in line with them that also want it. And they're all making strong competitive offers with, the seller's got their pick of who they want to sell it to.
They do. Yeah. And so it's a very challenging time on a 1031. And okay, so that was a great explanation of the reverse exchange, because people ask me and I struggle with telling the story, but that was really great, Jeff. So now I get it. And yeah, they're going to try to pull that off, find the new building, have the money all lined up, and then they can easily sell the three that they want to sell. Yeah. Okay. Now, these are some semantics. Does the title have to be in the same, if, Joe's LLC owns those three, or what if Joe owns one and Sam owns one and Steve owns one, and now they want to go to this new place? Is that a mess?
Well, I always try to drill down on who's who in the zoo. Who owns the relinquished property? If it is an LLC, who owns the LLC that owns the property? And try to go down that rabbit hole early, because at the end of this process, it's still an exchange. If Johnny owned the relinquished property, then I want Johnny to buy the replacement property. Well, Leanne, what happens if Johnny bought the relinquished property in 1987 before Johnny got married and owns it in his own name, and now he's got a spouse? I tell Johnny, look, I'm a qualified intermediary, but I'm also an unlicensed marriage therapist. I'd like to talk to you and your spouse to make sure that you're going from Johnny to Johnny, not from Johnny to Johnny and spouse, because if you use half of your exchange funds to buy someone else's seat at the table, they're not doing an exchange. You've just siphoned off half of your equity to buy someone else's place at the table. We really need to go from apples to apples, or in this case, Johnny to Johnny, which might require some careful diplomatic communication with your spouse. And you can always say, look, down the road, we can quick claim this into the two of us, or we can put it into our trust, or do whatever we need to do. But for the purposes of the exchange, you got to be careful that the same taxpayer that sold the relinquished property is buying the replacement property. And I'll tell you, if you go to a cookie cutter mortgage financing company and put both of the spouses on that loan application, they are tenacious and they will be obstinate and require both spouses to go into title, because they underwrote the loan using both spouses' income, and they really don't want to back off on that. So you got to really be careful with that to make sure you're having the right buyer.
So that right there leads me to, if you're even considering an exchange, you need to reach out and talk to someone like Jeff first, so you can plan. There might even be something a year or two beforehand, because now you throw in Minnesota's 1 to buy 2 to sell rule into that.
And
It's
that makes
complicated.
people think that they have an interest in the property. Well, I had to sign off when we sold it. Well, you really didn't have an interest. You had an inchoate marital interest, but you really weren't entitled to the property. It's what I tell people. Are you familiar with Ashton Kutcher, the television celebrity that had a
Sure.
TV show called Punked, where they would, do practical jokes on people? I feel like I'm on that television show all the time because people will call me up and say, Jeff, I've heard you do 1031 exchanges and I want to talk to you. I just sold my relinquished property last week. And the hair goes up on my neck. And I say, by sold, do you mean you signed a purchase agreement to sell the property? No, no, no. We closed on it and I've got the money in my bank account, right? Well, so this happens to me with so much frequency. I think I'm being punked. I think I'm being played because it happens all the time. People call me up and say, I want to set up an exchange. I've already closed on my relinquished property. And I have to delicately tell them they've walked off the dock. They got the
Yeah.
horse, the cart before the horse, whatever. You got to set up your exchange before the
Before.
benefits
Yeah.
and burdens of ownership shift. You have to give required notices to the other parties. You got to, dress up the closing statement. There's a lot
I,
you have to do.
you can't
So,
have money in your hand. That's the whole idea.
right. Otherwise, you get burned with the recognition of tax because you received the money, actually received it, or constructively received it even. So please,
Yeah.
real estate pro tip, always get your clients to set up the exchange first. And it can be uncomfortable because I get calls from the closing table where
Oh,
people say,
no.
well, I told my real estate agent to set this up, or I told my lawyer to set this up. And they're like, oh, that's not what I do. So I will set up an exchange in a hurry, 30 minutes or less if we have to, because people are at the closing table
Oh my
and they forgot
gosh.
to set up the exchange.
You do get those punk calls, don't you?
Indeed. Indeed.
Wow. I was educated early because I did it myself. So of course, as a realtor, you're right. I educate my team because they don't know what it is. It's a sophisticated move in real estate. You got to just understand it.
I've done exchanges for real estate agents and for closers at title companies, and I tell them this is going to be the greatest experience for your professional development because you're going to live through this process. You're going to feel the stress, the angst, and you're going to see what these deadlines really feel like, and it's going to make you better at your job. And they always agree. I'm so glad I did that because now it's going to make me more empathetic and better at advising my clients.
Well, and getting them in there right away. Figure this out first before
Right?
you even list. Yeah, I love that. Okay, so we if we have it's really important we got to buy in the same title as we're relinquishing. That's got to match the same name, the same entity.
Well, let's say that I've got John Doe as the seller of the relinquished property. I could say to John, if you want to be fancy, you could form a single member LLC that's disregarded for tax purposes, call it John Doe Enterprises LLC, and we could buy the replacement property through that single member LLC
Okay.
because the LLC is transparent. It doesn't really exist for tax purposes. Um, Sometimes people are buying liquor stores or dry cleaners or properties that have a lot of premises liability. They don't want to buy it in their own name and they're afraid that that's going to jeopardize their exchange. But there are ways to delicately and correctly insulate them from that personal liability.
Okay, and I have another question about sort of that entity thing. Okay, so then they figure, okay, fine, I'll buy it in the John Doe whatever. Then do people think that they can, the day after or at closing then change it? That
Oh,
probably disqualifies things, right?
well, I'm not a fan of the last minute switcheroo or the immediate switcheroo. Um, a lot of people will cavalierly buy properties in their own individual name and then they'll
Yeah.
deed it to their LLC. And the reason that they wanted to buy it in their individual name is it was cheaper and easier to work with their bank to finance the purchase if they were not using an LLC. But then they want to have their cake and eat it too and transfer it into the LLC. Well, if you read those loan documents, the bank's collateral can't be transferred to anyone without the bank's consent. So you are technically violating the due on sale clause potentially by transferring it to your LLC. If you want to do that game, why don't you just set up the LLC first and finance it and purchase it through the LLC, or at a minimum, get a carve out in your loan documents for a permitted transfer. Some banks like Chase back in the day used to have a clause that allowed you to transfer it to an LLC or to a trust for estate tax planning purposes. So it wasn't a technical violation of their loan documents, but that was the rare exception.
Interesting. But what I'm trying to say is, so really once the intermediary has the money, and then we, go ahead and buy the new property, which you provide the check because you had the money, we can the next day change it to something else, and we haven't lost the 1031 whatever. It doesn't like,
well,
there's no 2-year period or something.
I want John Doe to sell his relinquished property, and I want John Doe to buy the replacement property either directly in his name or in a disregarded entity. And I want John Doe to hold the property because the code says the property has to be held for investment or business purposes. Well, if John Doe does something inconsistent with holding it for investment or business purposes, it could violate the exchange. For example, there was a mother who bought 5 replacement properties, and after owning them for 7 months, she gifted each of the properties to one of her 5 children. And the IRS said, lady, you got to hold it for investment or business. You had a gratuitous intent. Your intent was to gift these properties to your kiddies, not to hold them for investment. And they backed off and unwound her exchange and made her pay the taxes. So you don't want to transfer your replacement property. You don't want to do something inconsistent with holding for investment or business. Why get cute when you've got this beautiful tax deferral? Why jeopardize it by doing something erratic or inconsistent?
It's kind of how we are about mortgage fraud. If you're going to buy that thing and say it's a second home or whatever, it better be.
Yeah.
Or I don't want to know anything about it. And I don't want to be a part of that. Okay, so now I want to know a little bit more about the formula. So, because I get this question a lot, explain about reinvesting the proceeds. So now we sold this, give me a sample scenario, and what's this formula?
Well, if we take off our business person hats and we put on our bean counter accounting hats, we look at 1031 from the idea that your basis in the old property gets transferred to the new property. You're carrying that tax deferred baggage from the old property with you to the new property, like a heavy Samsonite luggage, right? And let's imagine, Leanne, just make a really easy example. I sold a $100,000 relinquished property that had a $30,000 basis remaining in it after depreciation. Okay. Well, if I sold it in a taxable transaction, you say, Jeff, I don't want to pay taxes on $70,000 of profit, the difference between my basis of 30, my sales price of 100. I want to do a 1031 exchange. Imagine that this taxpayer buys one replacement property worth only $50,000. Well, what happens? The basis of 30 transfers over to the new property, and you would only be deferring taxes on every dollar of value that you're buying in that replacement property over and above the $30,000 transfer basis. So I'm only deferring taxes on $20,000, the difference between 30 and 50. I'm only deferring taxes on 20, and I'm paying taxes and recognizing gains on the buy down in value, which was $50,000. So I'm not really getting the bang for my tax deferral buck in that scenario. Well, let's change the hypothetical. Let's say that I buy a $200,000 replacement property. Well, what happens in that scenario is my $30,000 basis slides over to the new property. And because I bought a more expensive property that's $100,000 more valuable, I'm picking up new basis, additional basis for future depreciation. So my basis in that replacement property is 130. 30 that transferred over plus 100 of new value that I'm picking up over and above what I sold. Another way of saying that is my basis in the replacement property is the cost of the property minus my deferred gain of 70, gets you to 130 also. So in a 1031 exchange, you have three general rules of thumb. Those are called the Napkin Test. And it goes like this. In order to defer all of the gains, you have to do three things. You have to buy a property of equal or greater value. You have to buy a property of equal or greater equity, which is reinvesting all of your radioactive cash or proceeds from the sale. And lastly, you have to offset any debt relief, mortgages, liens, encumbrances that are paid off on the sale with new debt on the replacement property, or by adding additional cash in out of your own pocket. So debt relief can be offset by either new debt or new cash or some combination of new debt, new cash. Value, equity, and debt are your balls that you're juggling from an accountant perspective.
Okay, and then where does the word boot come in?
Boot is any non-like-kind property that you receive in the exchange process. What if you bought an apartment building, Leanne, and the owner of the property said, we're also including this forklift.
Oh,
The forklift is part of the purchase. Well, is the forklift real estate?
no.
No. So whatever the value of that forklift is, you'd be recognizing gains on that non-like-kind property that you're receiving. What if the seller sold you the apartment building and also gave you $20,000 of cash? Well, the $20,000 of cash that you're getting from the seller is probably boot. It's not real estate. It's not like kind of real estate. It is boot. So I got to be careful that you don't receive any non-like kind property in the exchange process. Another, hold on, just one thing. Hold the reins tight on your banker, because you need to first and foremost reinvest all of your cash proceeds from your relinquished property. And you may qualify to borrow more money, but you first and foremost need to reinvest your cash. If your banker sends the loan documents over and the amount that you're borrowing from the bank exceeds what you need to purchase the replacement property over and above your exchange funds that you're bringing in, that will result at the bottom of the closing statement, cash to borrower, say $20,000.
Uh-oh.
That's those dollars that are coming off the table are cash boot, non-like kind property you're receiving.
Yeah.
So you got to tell your banker, I'm not signing these loan documents. Go reprint them, lower the loan amount because you put too large of a loan on here. I don't want that.
Yeah, I don't want any cash because that's taxable.
Exactly. And you need to educate your banker from the outset that the loan's going to have to be tailored to what I need, not what I can borrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. See, there's a lot of planning is what I hear. And now I think you sort of talked about this. What's a partial tax deferred exchange? You kind of gave us an example of a partial, right?
Right. I mean, as you get older, you tend to get more conservative. And some people say to me, you know, I've made a killing here. I've had a good run. I've had some good luck, and my properties have gone up in value more than I thought they ever would. I'm not willing to reinvest all of my cash into new properties. I want to bury some of that cash in my mattress for a rainy day, or I want to pay off all of my debts, or whatever they want. They want to take some boot, and they're okay paying taxes on some of the proceeds, but not the whole thing. So in a partial 1031 exchange, the taxpayer is strategically deciding to either buy a less expensive replacement property or to not invest all of their cash. I think there are other ways to get to that result without triggering the gain, but sometimes people are really conservative. They don't want to take on more debt, or they don't want to risk it, and so they're willing to pay a little tax to take some cash off the table.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes they want to go on a trip around the world.
Yeah, you can't argue with that.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us a little bit more about these identifying rules, because I know these are critical. Like, you have a certain 45 days.
That's right. So go back to the 1970s. There was a case called Starker v. US, where Starker blew the doors off of the 1031 world by doing the first deferred exchange. And the IRS hated that tax court case and Supreme Court case that came from it. And Starker opened up the wild, wild west of 1031 deferred exchanges. So the IRS and the Treasury Service lobbied Congress and said, Congress, you got to give us the authority to write Treasury regulations to ratchet down and constrain this process. Congress gave the service the authority. They wrote their own Treasury regulations to control this process. These rules were not written with your success in mind. These were written to limit the number of people doing exchanges. The first thing they said is that any replacement properties that you acquire will not be considered like kind unless they were properly identified during the 45 days, or they're actually received within the 45 days. Well, if you're going to be buying anything and closing it on it after the 45th day, you have to identify it. How do you identify it? You identify it in writing by clearly and unambiguously describing it in a signed written document. And that identification has to generally be sent to the intermediary or someone that is a party to the transaction that's not disqualified. I recommend that people put a strong affirmative clause in their purchase agreements stating that their intent is to complete a 1031 exchange and elicit the cooperation of the seller, for a couple of reasons. One, I like to put it in the contract because I think it's good to sing it from the mountaintops. But
I
two,
always do.
the purchase agreement is a written document. It clearly and unambiguously describes the property, and it's delivered to someone that's a party to the transaction who's not disqualified, the seller. It could constitute an identification in a pinch. So I like to put my strong affirmative language in the purchase agreements. But typically, identification is mechanically done by filling out the replacement property identification form and sending it into the intermediary by midnight of the 45th day. And then we typically sign those, countersign them, date them, and send them back so you know that we got them. Now, there are rules under how many properties you can identify. The easiest rule is called the 3 property rule. Under that, you can identify any 3 properties without regard to their value. So Leanne, you could identify the IDS Center, the Fauché Tower, and the Landmark building in downtown St. Paul. Doesn't matter how expensive they are, it's just that it's 3 or fewer properties. And so most mom and pop investors are going to use the 3 property rule because it's really easy to understand and implement. But what if you want to identify more than 3 properties? How do you do that? Under the 200% rule, you can identify any number of properties, but the total aggregate value of all those properties that you list cannot exceed twice the value of the property that you relinquished. Well, I did an exchange for a client who sold an $80 million relinquished property. Under the 200% rule, you take $80 million, you double it. It's like 1.6. It's a big number, right? They had a huge amount of latitude under the 200% rule. Well, let's change that hypothetical and say that you only sold a $100,000 relinquished property. You'd only be able to identify up to $200,000 of replacement properties. You'd be better off probably using the 3 property rule in that instance. So the 200% rule is a backup alternative rule that's not used as often, and it's typically used by big players that have big sale prices. Now, there's one other even more seldomly used rule called the 95% exception. Typically, it's used in big portfolio purchases. So under the 95% rule, you can identify any number of properties and any value of properties, but you actually have to purchase and receive 95% of the value of those identified properties. So what if you identified 100 oil and gas properties in Texas, and on the day of closing, you were notified that one of the wells that you were going to buy has run dry? And you say, I'm not going to buy a dry well. That doesn't help me. Well, as long as you're still getting 95% of the portfolio that you identified, even with that one out, your identification is still considered valid. It's pretty damn close to the 100% rule, because sometimes if you have even one property fall out of bed, it constituted more than 5% of the value of the whole portfolio. So you got to be careful. You don't see people using the 95% rule too often. Usually it's, I'm buying 12 CVS drugstores, or I'm buying 100 oil and gas wells. It's usually used in big portfolio purchases.
So the oil and gas well counts as land?
It can, yes.
Interesting.
Particularly if you're buying the fee title.
So I have, it happened to me, Jeff, on one of my exchanges that I'm sure you handled. I got, and this can happen in today's market because, identifying 3 properties is tricky because, they're sold over the weekend and you're in multiple offers and multiple offers and multiple offers. And I ended up buying something I didn't really want, but I was stuck against the 45-day rule. I had to identify, and then, 2 of them fell off. So I had to buy the other one or pay the taxes. So I bought the other one, and that wasn't a great buy.
I had a friend who was a prolific real estate wheeler dealer in Minneapolis, primarily in multifamily. And he was in that same predicament, getting down to day 43 and had no idea what he was going to identify. So we got under contract to buy a meat packing facility in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And just like you, he regretted that he bought that property, purely driven by tax motivation, because it was a disaster. Shortly after buying the property, the tenant left in the middle of the night, but they left these decaying carcasses in the meat packing facility. He didn't find out that the tenant had vacated until it was a rotting mess, a stinking rotting mess. Health department got involved. I mean, he had one calamity after another because he bought something he probably shouldn't have bought.
Yeah, my building was in Uptown, and I didn't have enough time to finish my due diligence with the city, and they actually downzoned my property after I owned it.
Oh my God.
And it was commercial with a vacant lot, and I thought I could build, and it didn't work out. And
don't let the tax tail wag the dog. Yes, it's nice to get the tax deferral, but make sure it's a good business decision first and foremost.
That's right. Now, there's something really important that happened today to do with 1031s, and I'm going to share screen. And
well, before you do, let me do a little setup.
Yeah, good.
For years, decades, people have been talking about limiting 1031. During the Obama administration, they were talking about capping 1031 at $1 million of deferral, and other politicians have recommended getting rid of 1031 altogether. They think it's a fat cat tax loophole that's only used by the ultra rich, which we know it's actually mom and pops. It's janitors and people that sell tile, and it's mom and pops and farmers and small investors that typically avail themselves of 1031, at least in my business. But Congress has been debating and talking about eliminating 1031 since before Joe Biden was elected. When he was a candidate, he proposed capping 1031 that's at 500,000. And there's been a strong outcry from the National Association of Realtors, from the agricultural folks. And so last night, Congress was working in the wee hours, and they are in this video going to pass a non-binding amendment in support of keeping 1031. So play it.
Here we go.
Madam President, this amendment will prohibit any changes to the tax treatment of like-kind exchanges. President.
The senior senator from Oregon.
Madam President, it's my understanding that after 15 hours or so, this is the last amendment of the night. And I recommend we do it by voice vote.
The question is on the amendment. All those in favor say aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Madam President,
The majority leader.
Madam President, we're about to vote.
So there you go, folks. We back, Jeff? Yep, there you go, folks. Wait, I can't hear you, Jeff.
That is a positive indicator that 1031 may survive the tax reform. It was a non-binding amendment, but it's a good indication that the legislature wants, at least the Senate wants to keep 1031 around, because they understand that in order to have infrastructure, to have the best in class infrastructure, a lot of that comes from private infrastructure. Who pays for the warehouses and the workforce housing and the medical office buildings and all of the dialysis treatment centers? It's 1031 investors that are probably behind the bulk of that. And if we want to have the best in class infrastructure, we can't stymie investment in real estate and unduly tax and penalize real estate investors. And farmers in particular really know that you can be wealthy on paper, but have little or no cash in your pocket. That's the case that a lot of real estate investors find themselves in.
So I have two final questions here, and folks on here, nobody asked a question. If you want to, there is a chat box here, but you know what? I structured the questions and we've had Jeff answer probably anything you were thinking of. So we're in a pandemic, you know, and how has that changed 1031 activity?
I thought it was going to kill our business, but it's been the opposite. Congress and the Federal Reserve have worked to create sort of an economic safe harbor, if you will, or safety net by lowering interest rates and making capital accessible. I think the banks are all flush with lots of cash. They don't have enough borrowers to push out this cash to. That combined with a scarcity of real estate, and maybe also combined with the fact that people are working remotely. And if you're working remotely, wouldn't it be nice to have a home office? Maybe we need a bigger house. So people are moving and transitioning. People are buying houses along the North Shore in the Grand Marais area because they have fiber optic cable running right up the county. So why not work remotely from beautiful Grand Marais instead of working from somewhere in downtown? You know, so I think that there's a lot of things happening to creating a lot of interest in real estate, a scarcity of real estate, rising values. I don't know what the statistics are for the increase in values on single family homes in the Minneapolis metro area since the first of the year, but I would guess that prices are up about 15% since the beginning of the year.
14%.
That's what I was thinking. So, you know, I think there's a lot of things happening that are making real estate really exciting for investors and for people that like to put money into real estate and do deals because there's so much velocity right now.
And do you think, you know, just because I do trending, and what do you think in 2022, you know, do you think it's going to keep the pace, grow? It seems to be growing. People are willing to, you know, move up with their property, and now is such a good time to sell. If
I
you're-
think that you're going to see increased activity in 1031 exchanges during the third and fourth quarter of this year for
Yep.
sure.
I do too.
And I don't think the Federal Reserve is going to take the foot off the gas on the interest rates for another, say, 18 months. They've said they're going to keep rates low through 2022. So absent some crazy inflation, I think that they're going to keep interest rates low. And what does that mean for real estate? I think that means you're going to continue to see 14% increases in
Yep.
single family home values in the metro area. There's some pandemic uncertainty still in the marketplace that requires the Federal Reserve to accelerate things. Urban cores, downtowns like San Francisco, downtown Minneapolis, Manhattan, they're still struggling because people are not going back to their old patterns of going downtown. If you go downtown to Minneapolis and look in the parking ramps during the high point of the day, most of the parking ramps are sort of empty because there's not as many people going downtown to work because everyone's working remotely. Because of those changes and changes in travel, businesses are not paying their employees to travel to conferences or meetings because everything is being done remotely on Zoom. There's changes that have happened because of the pandemic, and we need to kind of work through those. And I don't think the Federal Reserve is going to change their pattern, which means the party is going to continue for another 18 months. But once the Fed starts raising those rates up, and if they raise them up too fast, then you could see a slowdown in appreciation and a decrease in velocity. But also you got to look at when is the next presidential election, because generally you don't see big swings in the economy right before a presidential election. And the Fed tries to be kind of neutral about where they're at with the economy right before a presidential election. And that's coming, what, three years from now. So maybe we have a good 18 months to almost 3 years of fun in the sun where we're all going to make money with appreciation. And it's a great time to dip your toe in and get started.
Yeah, I'm right with you. That was really put together well. And I'm going to show you, all you watchers here, a couple of things here, how to get in touch with Jeff, should you want to do a 1031 exchange, or if you have some questions, he's going to direct you.
Oh, before we do that, I just want to say, surround yourself with good professionals. I am just a humble administrator. I facilitate the exchanges. I'm not going to give you any tax advice. I'm not going to give you any legal advice, and I'm not going to close your real estate transaction. So you're going to need your accountant involved. You're going to need your lawyer to the extent you need a lawyer. You need a good title company. You need a great real estate agent. You might even need your financial planner, your estate planning attorney. There's all kinds of professionals to surround yourselves with. Use your resources during these big transitions to make sure that you don't make a mistake.
That is so critical, because that's one of the things I teach in my proven profit formula. It's all about your team you put together as you're going to scale a portfolio. Absolutely. And you do have to have the right realtor. And that's why my team is investment property realtors. Of course, we do normal house sales and all of that, but we know the investment side, and it's critical. Like you said, you got to have that 1031 language on the purchase agreement. It starts way before they list. So 2 things here. I'm going to share screen of how to get in touch with us. First off, I offer free strategy sessions, and you can go to my website, really is the fastest. It's leanneriley.com. And you'll find a button there. Easy to schedule a strategy session. And then I can point you in the right direction as far as real estate investing, and whatever it is you need, I can help you. And then here's how you contact Jeff. His email.
612-643-1031.
Yeah, 1031. That must have been tough to get. I don't know, maybe Google. So there's some good stuff on his website too. If you have some questions about it, you can look there. So I'm going to switch that off, and just remember, I provide this free education. Somebody is saying, thanks, Jeff. Very informative and helpful. Yeah. So good. There is really people on there. Fonda and Adam, great. I can see there is people there. Really did a good job, Jeff. And, it's great that I met you all that many years ago. And that's what this proves, in this business, if you find the right team players, like I've stuck with him. I used his title company for years and years and years, because you find the right team, you stick with them because you get the job done together.
That's right.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you for at least 20 years of friendship and camaraderie. I really enjoy working with you, Leanne, and it's just an honor to be on your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, guys. See you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.